Hello and welcome everybody. This is International Master Sam Shankland, and today I would like to continue my series on Garry Kasparov. So the last couple of videos showed sort of a young Kasparov, and this next one we're going to do is going to skip over a little bit where he really rose to power and start where he took on his greatest challenger yet, Anatoly Karpov. So Karpov was kind of a rough spot for Kasparov for at least a little while. And the first two games of their World Championship match in 1985 were drawn, but the third one did not end favorably for our hero. And unfortunately for him, that's the game we're going to look at today, because I think it really does exemplify his style as well. And yeah, we're going to see what happened. So Karpov playing white, Kasparov playing black. Karpov's at e4, c5, knight f3, e6. So Kasparov deviates from what would, the Najdorf, which would later become his. Really, he would play almost exclusively. He would always play other stuff here and there, but really he's always been a Najdorf player. But he chose the Taimana variation in this game, which starts as follows after knight c6. And there's two real reasons you would play this rather than a system with knight f6 first. And one of them, there's two reasons that it could be good or bad. The good reason is that g4, g5 won't necessarily come with tempo. So if let's look at the Scheveningen variation, for example. Knight f6, knight c3, d6. This carries attack with g4 is extremely dangerous. So it doesn't really run into g4 as fast. But the drawback is that white is not forced to play knight c3, and Karpov immediately takes advantage. So it starts with knight b5. So he's probing for weaknesses, looking at the d6 square, and black does not want to let him land a knight into d6, so he plays d6 himself. And now we see the point. Karpov plays c4. And he gets his c-pawn into the fray and takes a little more control of the center than he normally would be allowed to. So the game will now take a more positional nature than many of you, bloodthirsty, opposite-side castling Sicilian positions. But it really plays to Karpov's strengths. And we'll see what happens soon. So knight f6 played by Kasparov. Knight c3. And now, at this point, a6 is played. And this is a fine move. Knight a3. And it looks like white's knight's a little bit misplaced, but the problem in black's position now is his b6 square is a little bit weak, and white does have a little more space. If he just gets a few moves, plays bishop e2, knight c2, bishop e3, he'll have a very pleasant position. And it's not immediately easy for black to avoid this, so he's got to look for counterplay. Okay, so Kasparov plays bishop e7, Karpov plays bishop e2, castles, castles. And this position is a little bit... I would prefer to be white, even if it's not necessarily a huge advantage, I guess. Kasparov plays b6, pairing up with the bishop on b7. So bishop e3, bishop b7. And here Karpov made something of a controversial move. I probably would have just preferred maybe queen d2. The idea to play rook d1 and forever prevent d5, and it looks like a pretty pleasant position for white. I wouldn't worry too much about what's going on. It seems like he's just going to have a slight space advantage for a very long time without much counterplay. But Karpov played queen b3, attacking the loose pawn on b6. So let me ask you guys, what would you do here? Okay, if you want more time, pause your videos. The natural move would be knight d7, which defends the pawn and perhaps has notions of going to c5. But I think here it doesn't quite make that much sense. White might throw knight a4 in, but really if he just plays like a rook move, the knight sort of seems misplaced. Even if it gets to c5, let's say queen back here, I'm not sure. Well, okay, maybe now. No, now knight c5 doesn't even work, because I can just take the knight. And we've got two pins, one to the queen and one to the bishop. So that just wouldn't even work, and it's kind of hard for black to untangle his pieces. If he plays like queen c7, for example, maybe I just play knight c2. And, okay, if knight c5, queen a3, and I'll hit you at b4 next, black's pieces are getting pushed backwards, and white is well developed. So I would maybe avoid this line. Kasparov played in his own style very energetically with knight to a5, attacking the queen. Okay, so white takes the pawn, and then he captures on e4. Okay, so knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, and now what happened was we got a pawn trade. Black took the e4 pawn and white took the b6 pawn. So white now has a queenside majority, but black has a central majority. Okay, so Karpov took on d8. Now, important question. Which way would you take back here? Three possibilities, and only one of them is okay. Okay, so if you tried to take back with a rook, shame on you. You walked into bishop b6, and that's going to win some material for white and leave him with a clear advantage. So taking with the bishop is the only acceptable course of action. And now Karpov played rook a d1. And here we have an interesting moment in the game. So I think this sort of showed that Kasparov, while he was obviously a phenomenally strong player, and he was still a little bit young and maybe not that mature a player, and he needed to sort of add more elements to his game. Here, a move like rook to b8 would make some sense. Say attack the b2 pawn. Okay, b3, bishop e7. Defend the pawn. Its position looks approximately equal. Neither side's pawn majority is going to be particularly effective in the near future, and it's both sides have reasonable pieces, but not amazing. This position really seems approximately equal in just about all regards. So that's what I would suggest for Big K. But he immediately struck with d5, attacking in the center. So this is a pawn sacrifice because white can play f3 and push the bishop back. There's really no other good move. If white plays like c5 after knight c6, he's simply worse because his knight on a3 is thoroughly dominated, and black's center is going to be very strong. So that would just be bad. And okay, if he plays, I don't know, rook d2 or something after some trades on c4, black really shouldn't have that many problems. It's a very solid position, bishop f6. Seems fine for black. But Karpov immediately took up the challenge and played f3. And now we saw what Kasparov had in mind. He drops his bishop back to f5. And so c takes d5, and now Kasparov plays bishop to e6. So his idea is, okay, he's going to take the a2 pawn and we're going to equalize, but really it's not that easy. So white has two ways to maintain a pawn advantage here. Rook to d2, which would be preparing to meet bishop takes a2 with b4, and thus hitting the knight and the bishop. Or rook to d6, counterattacking the a6 pawn. So I'll give you guys a second to see if you can find the answer. What's the best move for white? Okay, if you want more time, pause your videos. I think it makes the most sense to play rook d6. For example, with rook d2, I think this bishop e7 move is a little bit annoying because the knight doesn't really have a good square. If the knight comes back to b1, then you definitely can take this pawn because b4 I can take the knight in between move, and black equalizes. So, and this knight's just kind of dominated. There's nothing I can really do. Knight c2 also I can take on a2 safely. So it's going to be a little bit hard, and plus black may be threatening at some point to take on a2, and it's going to be hard to defend the pawn, and it'll start taking the open files. I certainly would prefer rook d6. Okay, so bishop a2, rook a6. Now here's another point where Kasparov really showed that he was, well, obviously very strong, something of a one-dimensional player at the time. Of course, that changed drastically in the future, which we'll get into in later videos, but the best move here was certainly not in young Kasparov or older Kasparov style, but it was still the best move. So what would you guys play here? You're down a pawn, and you've got to try to figure out what the best way to try to hold a draw is. Okay, if you want more time, pause your videos. The best move is just to take the rook and play some bishop e7, blockade this pawn, use this diagonal, blockade that square, rook on b8. It's not going to be very easy for white to push this pawn through. Black's very solid, and he can really set up some pretty good blockading ideas. So that would have been best, but Kasparov, true to his style, tried to play actively with rook to b8. And this makes sense, and he wants to attack this pawn on b2. But tactically, he found himself in big trouble here. Karpov even didn't play the best move. I think after bishop b5, our hero is going to face some serious issues because bishop c5 is coming soon. And there's not much to do about it. But Karpov played bishop c5 right away, which certainly is not a bad move. And I think white's basically winning at this point. Rook e8 obviously only moved. Now bishop b5, blocking this file and gaining a tempo. And now we're sort of seeing that Kasparov was trying to keep the position complicated by avoiding trades, but really what's happened is that white's pieces have just become much more active than their black counterparts. So Kasparov plays rook to e6, and Karpov immediately advances b4, pushing his pawn forward. And this position is getting very bad for Kasparov. So the knight has to move away. So he plays knight to b7, and Karpov simply retreats. Bishop back to f2. And it's pretty clear this b-pawn he's not going to want to stop anytime soon. So, there's not much to be done here. Like, maybe he could try bishop e7, which he did, but after knight c2, again, you can't really get rid of this b-pawn. For example, bishop b3 would be nice, but here I think white has knight d4 with some counter threats against pieces, probably forcing takes and no takes, and this bishop's hit, and knight c6 might be a problem, so bishop d5 is probably forced, and like rook b1 now, and this pawn is not going anywhere. He's going to continue to be a thorn in black's back. So there's really no way for Kasparov to take the pawn back, and he can't really set up a blockade now either, and very soon he found himself just lost. So he played bishop d5, now rook d1, strong move. Karpov, just playing in his own style, positionally just activating his pieces. He doesn't need to calculate anything super deeply. Now Kasparov dropped back with bishop b3, with the idea that knight d4 now fails on account of the rook hanging. But after bishop b3, Karpov had a little, probably not a surprise, but a good move in mind. Rook d7 with some counterattack on black's pieces, and really at this point everything falls apart. Computer is saying white has more than enough to win the game. So I'm just going to show the last couple painful moves briefly. Kasparov played rook to d8, I guess hoping for rook to d1 in some way. And, okay, Karpov captured on e6. Now, if Kasparov were to recapture on e6 after rook takes e7, white's going to end up with a full piece ahead. So that would not be acceptable. So Kasparov took back this way. But now Karpov, I believe, just dropped back to e1. And his rook is hit, and there's not much to be done about it. So if he moves it away to like d8, I can take on e7 and I win. For example, bishop c2 takes, and I'm up a piece. You don't quite get enough time to deliver checkmate, because after bishop d3, I actually deliver checkmate. So there's not quite enough time for black to get the counterplay he needs. So after rook e1, Kasparov played rook to c7. And now stronger to finish the game, bishop b6. And Kasparov resigned here because the rook is forced to leave the defense of the bishop. And if, say, rook takes c2, rook takes e7, he's hitting the knight, and checkmate on e8. Only move would be knight d6, and now after bishop c5, black loses a piece. So not a very successful start for Kasparov in the match against Karpov, but I think it was abundantly clear that as he got more experience playing against Karpov, who was probably still at the time the best player in the world, and a very different player than himself, he grew a lot as a player. He still retained his amazing calculating and tactical ability, but he also matured positionally, and we'll see that over the course of the next 40-some games, things took a little turn for the better. So until next time, this is Sam Shankland signing off.